I have Dr. Michael Oren standing by in Israel, and boy, am I glad. Good morning, Dr. Oren. How are you?
Good. Not in Israel, in Washington, D.C., Hugh.
You got up this early to talk to me?
You know, that's true love. I got to hear the music. Little Frank Sinatra
Okay.
on, watching the sun rise over the White House right now.
Well, I got to say to you, I am so glad you're available, and thank you for getting up early, because I have no idea what Israel is going to do on the northern border. I know that you're getting condemned for hitting Hamas in an UNRWA institution where they were doing their usual thing. And I imagine that Hamas has exaggerated the death toll of civilians. But I really want to talk to you about Lebanon. Can you give us a status report on whether or not the North is going to be at war soon? I mean, into Lebanon.
That's precise. That is one of the major reasons I've come to Washington, D.C. I come to this city, and nobody knows what's going on up north here. Nobody knows there's actually a war going on there already. Has been going on since October 7th, when Hezbollah joined the fight against Israel with Hamas, where Hezbollah has fired thousands of rockets at northern Israel. The entire northern part of the country is uninhabited. All these major cities are empty. We have between 60 and 80,000 internal refugees. Dozens of Israelis have been wounded and killed. And the Galilee, and it's an area that's precious to a lot of Americans. Galilee's on fire. It's going up in a blaze. And the situation is utterly intolerable. It would be intolerable for any country, certainly the state of Israel, now fighting a multi-front war. Tremendous pressure on the government to act. I don't think the government can hold back much longer. And nobody knows it here. And this is a very different war, Hugh. Hamas is a tactical threat. With all of its horrors, all of its atrocities, its rockets, it can destroy the state of Israel. But Hezbollah is a strategic threat. We're talking about 150 to 170,000 rockets, which are much longer range, heavier rockets, very accurate. They can pick off jeeps. They can pick off people trying to go back into their homes. And they've got about 100,000 terrorists under arms. That's about 3 times Hamas's size. And these guys have been massacring Syrians for a decade, so they're really adept at it. So this is a huge war, and one with regional ramifications. And the Biden administration, yes, is putting tremendous pressure on us not to go to war. But I don't know what options are left for us. How much longer should our ally expect us to put up with this type of outrageous aggression and provocation?
Now, it is 8 months since the massacre on 10/7, and if I'm not mistaken, Hezbollah has fired into Israel every day for 8 months, often many times, killing soldiers and civilians, destroying the north, making it uninhabitable, and you've got 100,000 Israelis as far south as Sderot and all over the country waiting to go back, and they've got school it's basically a state of war in the north. It will be a conventional war, correct? The Israeli Air Force could suppress a great deal of the Hezbollah activity and tanks' role. Am I right about that?
But it still is a different war. Hezbollah has hidden most of its missile force beneath the population of Lebanon, particularly southern Lebanon. Beneath 200 villages in southern Lebanon, you have rockets. You have the family rocket. It's in the living room. The roof opens up, the rocket goes out and hits Haifa. That cannot be interdicted by air power alone. It's going to have to be a ground war. And it's a ground war that's very different than the Hamas war, because the estimated rate of rocket fire by the IDF is between 2,000 and 6,000 rockets a day. As remember, these are longer range. They can target our airfields, our air bases. They can target our oil refineries. They can target Dimona. They can hit it. And they can hit as far south as Eilat. So the entire state of Israel is going to be under intense rocket fire. The army is going to have to act immediately, swiftly, and move into southern Lebanon. And even that won't be enough, because many of these rockets are also situated around Beirut and in populated areas around Beirut. A very different war.
I did not know that. I was under the impression that all of their missiles and rockets were south of the river but north of Israel. You're saying that they've actually deployed all the way up to Beirut? Is it going to be a repeat of 1982? I'm old enough to remember the first Lebanon war.
And I was old enough to actually be in the first Lebanon war.
That's what I thought.
That's right. Boy, we're aging ourselves. I shouldn't be up this early, right?
That's right.
I don't know about the repeat of 1982, but it's certainly a devastating war. And I don't think we're going to make the mistake that we made in 2006. And I was in that war, too, the second Lebanon war. And in the Second Lebanon War, we went to war against Hezbollah because we made a distinction between Lebanon and Hezbollah. Today, that distinction no longer continues. The United States says there's a place called Lebanon. The United States says there's an entity called the Lebanese Army. We don't think so. We think there's a place called Hezbollah, and we think there's a Lebanese army that's basically Hezbollah as well. And I think Israel this time will go to war against Lebanon, and it'll be a state versus state war and not state versus a terrorist organization war, which has a whole different...
Ambassador, what happened to the Maronites? What happened to the Sunnis that used to ally in the Druze in Lebanon, who used to be the allies of Israel? Have they been erased?
They've been co-opted. And some major Maronite leaders have thrown in their lot with the Hezbollah. Michel Aoun, one of the leaders of the Maronites there, has thrown in his lot with Hezbollah. Others have been browbeaten. Listen, 2 years ago, you had this explosion in Beirut that basically leveled half of Beirut. And
right on the pier.
Remember this? Leveled half of Beirut. And no one said anything. No one could say anything against Hezbollah. These were all Hezbollah munitions that went off, these huge amounts.
Oh, that was fertilizer, wasn't it, Mr. Ambassador? Wasn't that a fertilizer warehouse?
Yes, it was just fertilizer. It was being used for crops. By the way, it was the same fertilizer they found in terrorist cells in Europe, the exact same fertilizer. And
so tell me, we see Blinken has announced he's going back to Israel again. You guys must be so sick of Americans showing up and telling you how to run your war. But he's going back next week. Is that going to delay again whatever Israel needs to do wherever it needs to do it? I really think at some point, doesn't the War Cabinet say, nice to see you, we're not talking to you today, we're busy, we have 2 wars going on?
Well, certainly the United States has put pressure on Israel not to do this. Now, a card's on the table. In the first week of the war, this is back in October, I published an article in the Israeli press calling on Israel to freeze, more or less, the situation in Gaza, keep pounding Hamas from the air, sea, and ground, but to focus our major military effort on the north. Again, my big fear was that we get to where we are today, where the army has now been fighting for months and months. Our ammunition is very, very critically low. And our foreign relations are very strained. We're isolated. Back in October, we had a lot of international sympathy. We had 2 major U.S. military naval flotillas in our area, the Eisenhower and the Ford aircraft carriers. We had 260,000 reservists called up, and we were in a good position to deal with the strategic threat. We're no longer in the same position, obviously. It's not optimal. It's far from optimal. But at the end of the day, we're going to have no choice. Now, the Secretary is going to try to back an effort that's been mounted by U.S. diplomat Amos Hochstein. He's a very capable diplomat. He's trying to reinstate UN Resolution 1701. That is the resolution from 2006. It was Condoleezza Rice forged this at the end of the Second Lebanon War, and it called for Hezbollah to remove its forces north of the Litani River. That's 15 to 20 miles north of our border, and to have UNIFIL, the UN force, move in as sort of a buffer between us. So UNIFIL, of course, is a joke, doesn't do anything, polishes its boots, and Hezbollah simply ignored 1701. So the big question now is, what would convince Hezbollah to implement this resolution? Why would Hezbollah retreat under Israeli fire? And what leverage could the United States bring to bear on Hezbollah in Iran? Now, I'm at a loss to think what that could be, but I wish Amos Hochstein, all the success, because unless those 4 move very far from our border, nobody will come back and live in Metula. No one will come back and live in Kiryat Shmona. You wouldn't either. You wouldn't want your kids or grandkids to live there either.
We have 1 minute left, Ambassador. Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted the invitation. He's coming on July 24th to address Congress. Is there anyone in the administration who is actually thinking sanely about what Israel's situation is, because they have a strategic problem in both the north and the south and in Iran, and all we do is tactically prepare for a November election, which they don't seem to be doing well in the Biden administration?
What can I say? Obviously, domestic politics plays a role here. But it's now been many, many years that the United States has refused to take action against Iran, direct action. I mean, Iranian proxies have mounted close to 200 attacks against American bases, and no one will fire a single bullet against Iran until someone does. Exact price for Iran, there'll be no peace in the Middle East.